I stood in the middle of my rented apartment at 2 a.m., bare feet cold on the hardwood floor, and stared at the man sleeping in my bed. His chest rose and fell gently, the same rhythm that had lulled me to sleep for 3 years, but now it felt like a stranger's breath. In my hand, I clutched a manila folder, thick, unmarked, the kind people hide in the back of closets, and my fingers were so tight around it that my knuckles ached. He knew. The thought hit me like a fist to the sternum, stealing the air from my lungs. Not maybe knew, or might have suspected. He knew. He knew my parents' life savings, $87,000, every penny they'd scraped together from 30 years of working blue-collar jobs, every dollar they'd planned to live on in retirement, was gone. He knew his brother, Jake, had taken it. And he'd chosen to lie to me. For 3 years. I didn't scream. Didn't wake him up to yell or cry or demand answers. I just stood there, watching his face, and felt something inside me break, clean, sharp, irreversible. All the confusion, the late nights I'd spent staring at bank statements that never added up, the times I'd asked him if something was wrong and he'd smiled and said, "Everything's fine, baby," the way his family always avoided my eyes when money came up, it all clicked. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. I'd moved into this apartment 2 weeks ago, after he'd suggested we take a break from our marriage. He'd framed it as a chance to reset, said we'd been stressed, that space would do us good. I'd cried then, begged him to talk to me, to fix whatever was broken. Now I realized the break wasn't for us. It was to keep me distracted while they covered their tracks. The folder had fallen out of the back of his old suitcase when I'd gone to grab a sweater for him last night. He'd left it in the closet here, like he'd forgotten it existed. Inside were bank transfer receipts, Jake's name on every one, emails between them discussing how to explain the missing funds if I asked too many questions, a handwritten note from my husband, "She'll never notice if we take it slow. Mom says family comes first. Family comes first." I laughed, a harsh, hollow sound that stuck in my throat. I'd spent 3 years trying to be part of that family. I'd learned to make Jake's favorite lasagna even though I hated mushrooms. I'd sat through countless Sunday dinners listening to stories about their childhood, stories I was never part of. I'd bitten my tongue when his mom criticized my job, my clothes, the way I didn't quite fit. I'd done everything I could to be enough, and they'd rewarded me by stealing from my parents. My mom had called me last month, her voice tight with worry, asking if we'd had any trouble with the money. "Just checking," she'd said. "We don't need it back anytime soon," but I noticed the account was lower than I remembered. I'd assured her it was fine, told her we'd just moved some funds around for a small investment. I'd lied to my own mother to cover for his betrayal. The bed creaked, and he rolled over, murmuring something in his sleep. I stepped back, the folder pressed to my chest, and felt tears burn my eyes, not for him, not for the marriage, but for the girl I'd been 3 years ago. The girl who'd walked down the aisle believing love meant patience, meant compromise, meant swallowing your pride to keep the peace. The girl who'd thought marrying him meant she'd never be alone again. That girl was gone. I walked to the closet and pulled out my duffel bag, small, worn, the one I'd had since college. I packed quickly, throwing in clothes, my laptop, the folder of evidence, the photo of my parents on their 30th anniversary. I didn't take any of the things he'd given me, no jewelry, no sweaters, no mementos. They felt like lies too. When I was done, I stood at the door and looked back at him. He was still sleeping, his face soft in the moonlight. For a second, I hesitated. Had he ever loved me? Or had I just been a convenient wife, quiet, compliant, someone who wouldn't rock the boat? I didn't know. I didn't care anymore. I turned the doorknob slowly, careful not to make a sound, and stepped into the hallway. The air outside was cold, crisp, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I didn't leave a note. Didn't send a text. Didn't look back. Some betrayals don't deserve a scene. They just deserve silence. And a goodbye that's as quiet as the lies that broke you. As I walked to my car, the folder tucked safely in my bag, I whispered to myself, "So this is what freedom feels like." It hurt like hell. But it was real. When I first met Ethan, I thought he was the answer to every quiet prayer I'd ever had. I was 25, working as a junior graphic designer, living in a tiny studio apartment, and tired of feeling like I was always on the outside looking in. My parents had raised me to be polite, to go with the flow, to never make waves, and that's exactly what I'd done. I'd let friends cancel plans last minute, let coworkers take credit for my ideas, let strangers walk all over me because I was scared of confrontation. Ethan was different. He was calm, steady, the kind of person who made you feel safe just by being in the room. We met at a coffee shop, cliché, I know, but it felt like fate. He'd spilled his latte on my laptop, apologized profusely, and offered to buy me a new one. I'd laughed it off, said it was fine, but he'd insisted on getting my number so he could make it up to me. 2 weeks later, we went on our first date. 6 months later, he proposed. I said yes before he'd even finished asking. I thought marriage would be different from the loneliness I'd felt before. I thought it would be two people, side by side, making decisions together, building a life that belonged to both of us. But from the very beginning, it was clear that Ethan's family came first, and I was just along for the ride. His family wasn't mean. That's the worst part. They didn't yell or insult me. They just excluded me. Quietly, politely, like I was a guest who'd overstayed their welcome. We started planning our wedding 3 months after getting engaged, and I quickly learned that our wedding was really their wedding. His mom picked the venue, a country club I'd never even heard of, way outside my budget, without asking me. His sister chose the bridesmaids' dresses, frilly, pink, nothing I would have picked, and said, "Don't worry, it'll look nice on everyone." Jake, his brother, insisted we hire his friend as a DJ, even though I'd already found someone I loved. Ethan noticed my quiet disappointment, but he just patted my hand and said, "Let's not make this a big deal, Lila. It's just a wedding. What matters is we're getting married." So I smiled. I nodded. I said, "You're right." That's how it went for 3 years. Every decision, big or small, was made without me. When we talked about buying a house, Ethan and his dad picked out a neighborhood I hated, said it was good for resale. When I got a promotion at work that would require working late a few nights a week, his mom said, "A wife should be home to cook dinner for her husband," and Ethan said, "Maybe you should turn it down, baby. We don't need the extra money." When my grandma died, and I wanted to fly home for the funeral, Jake said, "We already have plans for that weekend, you can't miss Mom's birthday dinner," and Ethan said, "It's just one dinner, Lila. Grandma would understand." I didn't turn down the promotion. I flew home for the funeral. But I felt guilty about both. Like I'd broken some unspoken rule by putting my needs first. Ethan wasn't a bad man. He was just passive. He hated conflict more than anything. Whenever something bothered me, whenever I tried to talk to him about feeling left out, he'd shut it down. "Everything's fine," he'd say. "You're overthinking. Let's not fight." So I stopped talking. I stopped trying to explain how lonely I felt, how much it hurt to be the outsider in my own marriage. I learned to swallow my feelings, to smile and nod, to be the flexible, grateful, reasonable wife his family wanted me to be. I stopped hanging out with my friends as much. They noticed the change in me, how quiet I'd become, how I never talked about Ethan anymore, and they asked questions. "Are you okay? Does he treat you right?" I'd lie, say I was just busy, say everything was great. I didn't want to admit that my perfect marriage was falling apart, that I was losing myself in it. I started working later and later, staying at the office until 8 or 9 p.m. just to avoid going home. My apartment felt like a stranger's house, filled with Ethan's things, his family's photos, his mom's knickknacks. I had a small corner in the bedroom with my books and my laptop, but that was it. Everything else belonged to them. The worst night was our 3rd wedding anniversary. I'd planned a surprise dinner, cooked his favorite meal, lit candles, bought him a watch he'd been eyeing. I'd been looking forward to it for weeks, hoping it would be just the two of us, a chance to reconnect. But when he got home, he said, "Jake's having a crisis, his girlfriend broke up with him. We're all going to his place to cheer him up. You can come if you want, but it'll probably be just us guys." I wanted to scream. I wanted to say, "This is our anniversary. What about me?" But instead, I smiled and said, "That's fine. I'll save the dinner for tomorrow." He kissed my cheek, grabbed his jacket, and left. I sat at the table alone, staring at the cold food, and cried. Not because Jake was upset, not because Ethan had forgotten our anniversary, but because I realized I didn't even know how to ask for what I wanted anymore. My voice had been stolen by 3 years of silence, 3 years of being told my needs didn't matter. That night, I lay in bed alone and thought, is this what marriage is supposed to be? Is this what I signed up for? I didn't have an answer. But I knew one thing, I couldn't keep living like this. I just didn't know how to stop. My parents never had much money. My dad worked as a mechanic at a small shop downtown, fixing cars for minimum wage plus tips. My mom was a teacher's aide at the elementary school I'd attended, making barely enough to cover the bills. But they were frugal, they shopped at thrift stores, cooked at home every night, saved every penny they could, and by the time I was 25, they'd built up a nest egg, $87,000, their life savings. They never talked about it much. It was their safety net, for retirement, for emergencies, for if something ever happened to one of them. But when Ethan and I started talking about buying a house, they sat me down at their kitchen table, my mom's hands folded in her lap, my dad staring at his coffee cup, and said, "We want to lend you the money for a down payment." I thought they were joking. "Mom, Dad, no, you can't do that. This is your savings." My dad shook his head. "We've worked hard for this money, Lila. But what's the point of saving if we can't help our daughter? You and Ethan deserve a home of your own. A place to build a life." My mom reached across the table and took my hand. "It's not a gift, honey. It's a loan. When you're ready, when you can afford it, you can pay us back. But until then, we want you to have it." I cried. I hugged them both, tight, and promised I'd never let them down. I promised I'd take care of the money, that I'd never touch it unless it was for the house. They smiled and said, "We trust you." That's the word that haunted me later, trust. They trusted me. And I'd betrayed that trust. Ethan and I talked about the money the night I told him. We were sitting on the couch in his apartment, watching a movie, and I said, "My parents want to lend us the down payment for the house. All of it." His eyes lit up. "Really? That's amazing, Lila. We can finally stop renting. We can get that house in Maplewood, the one with the backyard." I nodded, but I felt a knot in my stomach. "Ethan, this is their life savings. We have to promise, we'll never touch this money for anything else. Not for emergencies, not for investments, not for anything. It's sacred." He pulled me close, kissed my forehead. "I promise, baby. Cross my heart. This money is for our house and nothing else. We'll put it in a separate account, just for the down payment. We'll never even look at it unless we're ready to buy." I believed him. I always did. We opened a joint savings account the next week, deposited the $87,000, and set it aside. For 6 months, everything was fine. We looked at houses on weekends, talked about paint colors and furniture, dreamed about starting a family there. Ethan never mentioned the account, never asked to borrow from it, and I breathed a sigh of relief. I thought we were on the same page. Then, 6 months later, I noticed something was off. I'd logged into our bank account to check our regular savings. We were trying to save up for closing costs, and out of habit, I pulled up the joint account with my parents' money. The balance was $72,000. I blinked, thinking I'd misread it. I refreshed the page. Still $72,000. $15,000 was gone. My hands started shaking. I called Ethan immediately. He was at work, and his voice was distracted when he answered. "Hey, baby, what's up?" "Ethan, have you been into the joint account? The one with my parents' money?" There was a pause. No. Why? Is something wrong?" "The balance is $72,000, I said, my voice tight. "It was $87,000. Where did the other $15,000 go?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Oh, right. I forgot to tell you. Jake needed a loan. He's been having some trouble with his business, and he asked if he could borrow a little. I told him he could pay it back in a few months." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "You what?" "Ethan, we promised. We said we'd never touch that money for anything else. That's my parents' life savings." "He's my brother, Lila," he said, his voice getting defensive. He needed help. What was I supposed to do? Say no? Mom would have killed me. "Did you ask me?" I said. Did you even think to call me and say, hey, Jake needs money, should we lend him some of Lila's parents' savings? It's not just your parents' money, he said. It's our account. And I didn't think it was a big deal. He'll pay it back. I promise. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that it was a big deal, that he'd broken our promise, that he'd betrayed my trust. But instead, I just said, when will he pay it back? Within a few months, he said. I'll talk to him this week, make sure he knows it's a priority. I hung up the phone and sat there, staring at the computer screen, feeling sick to my stomach. I wanted to call my parents, tell them what had happened, but I was too ashamed. I'd promised to take care of the money, and I'd failed. Over the next few months, the balance kept dropping. $60,000. $45,000. $30,000. Every time I asked Ethan about it, he'd brush it off. Jake's still having trouble. He'll pay it back soon. Mom said we should help him out, family comes first. It's just money, Lila. We'll get it back. I started having panic attacks. Waking up in the middle of the night, sweating, heart racing, thinking about my parents' savings, about what would happen if Jake never paid it back. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, and wonder if Ethan was lying to me. If Jake was ever going to pay the money back. If I'd made a mistake in trusting him. But I never said anything else. I didn't want to fight. I didn't want to be the unreasonable wife. I just kept telling myself that Ethan was right, that it was just money, that Jake would pay it back. I was lying to myself. I knew it then. I just didn't have the courage to admit it. The family dinner was Jake's idea. He called Ethan earlier that week and said, I miss my favorite sister-in-law. Let's all get together for dinner at Mom's house on Sunday. Ethan had been thrilled, said it would be good for us to spend time with the family. I'd smiled and nodded, even though the thought of sitting through another Sunday dinner made my skin crawl. Mom's house was exactly the same as always, big, white, with a perfectly manicured lawn, a dining room table that seated 12, and walls covered with photos of Ethan, Jake, and their sister, Mia. No photos of me. Not even our wedding photo. I arrived early to help cook, like I always did. Mom was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of spaghetti sauce, and Mia was sitting at the island, scrolling through her phone. Hey, Lila. Mia said, looking up. Jake's running late, he had to stop by the office to pick up something. Mom turned around, smiling. How are you, dear? Ethan said you've been working a lot lately. You should really slow down, you don't want to get burned out. I'm fine, I said, washing my hands. Just busy with a project. You work too hard, Mom said. A wife's first priority should be her husband and her family. Not her job. I bit my tongue. I'd heard this speech 100 times. I know, Mom. But it's just for a little while. She nodded, turning back to the sauce. Well, at least Ethan's not as focused on work as you are. He's a good man, always putting family first. I didn't say anything. I just started chopping vegetables. Ethan arrived 20 minutes later, followed by Jake 10 minutes after that. Jake walked in with a big smile, carrying a bottle of wine. Sorry I'm late. Had to close a big deal at work. Mom clapped her hands. Wonderful, Jake. I knew you'd pull through. Jake grinned, winking at Ethan. Wouldn't have been possible without you, bro. Thanks for having my back. Ethan smiled, but there was something off about it, like he was nervous. No problem, man. We sat down to dinner an hour later. The table was filled with food, spaghetti, garlic bread, salad, Mom's famous chocolate cake for dessert. We talked about work, about Mia's upcoming vacation, about the weather. It was all small talk, the kind of conversation that fills the silence but means nothing. Then Jake brought up money. He was talking about his business, about how things were finally turning around, and he laughed and said, You know, Lila, I've been meaning to tell you, you worry way too much about money. Some people are just too attached to numbers. The table went quiet. For a second, no one said anything. Then Mia laughed. It's true, Lila. You're always checking your bank account, always stressing about bills. Money's just paper, you shouldn't let it control you. Mom nodded. Jake's right, dear. Family is what's important. Money comes and goes. I looked around the table. Mia was smiling, Mom was nodding, Jake was grinning like he'd just told the funniest joke in the world. And Ethan? He was staring at his plate, his fork moving back and forth through his spaghetti, not saying a word. That's when it hit me. They all knew. Mom knew. Mia knew. Jake knew. Ethan knew. Everyone knew that Jake had taken my parents' savings, and they thought it was funny. They thought I was being too attached to numbers for caring about my parents' life savings. They thought it was okay to steal from me, from my family, because family comes first. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands started shaking so bad that I had to set down my fork. I looked at Ethan, hoping he'd meet my eyes, hoping he'd say something, defend me, admit the truth. But he didn't. He just kept staring at his plate. Is that what you think? I said, my voice so quiet I could barely hear it. That I'm just being silly for worrying about money? That money's just paper? Jake's smile faded. Lila, I didn't mean it like that. Yes, you did, I said. You took my parents' savings, $87,000. Their life savings. And you all think it's funny. You all think I'm overreacting. Mom's face hardened. Lila, that's not fair. Jake needed help. We're family, we're supposed to help each other. Family doesn't steal from each other, I said. Family doesn't lie to each other. Family doesn't keep someone in the dark for months while they take their parents' retirement money. Ethan finally looked up. Lila, let's not make a scene. We can talk about this later. A scene? I said, laughing. You want to talk about a scene? How about the scene of me finding out that my husband, my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, and my brother-in-law all knew that my parents' savings were gone, and no one thought to tell me? How about that scene? Jake stood up. Okay, that's enough. You're being unreasonable. I told Ethan I'd pay the money back. When? I said. When are you going to pay it back, Jake? Because it's been months, and the balance keeps dropping. When are you going to stop stealing from my parents? Lila, sit down, Ethan said, grabbing my arm. His grip was tight, too tight. You're embarrassing yourself. I pulled my arm away. Embarrassing myself? You're the one who's embarrassed. Embarrassed that you lied to me. Embarrassed that you chose your brother over your wife. Embarrassed that you broke your promise. I stood up from the table. I'm not hungry anymore. I'm going home. No, you're not, Ethan said. We're not leaving until you calm down. I'm not going home with you, I said. I'm going to my apartment. Mom stood up. Lila, don't be ridiculous. It's dark out, Ethan will drive you. I don't need Ethan to drive me, I said. I don't need any of you. Not anymore. I walked to the door, my hands still shaking. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see their faces, their anger, their disappointment, their indifference. When I got to my car, I started crying. Not because I was sad, but because I was so angry. Angry at Jake for stealing the money. Angry at Mom and Mia for defending him. Angry at Ethan for lying to me, for choosing his family over me, for making me feel like I was the one in the wrong. But most of all, I was angry at myself. Angry for being so naive, for trusting them, for staying silent for so long. I drove to my apartment, turned off my phone, and cried for hours. When I finally stopped, I knew one thing: my marriage was over. I just didn't know how to end it. 2 weeks after the dinner party, Ethan came to my apartment. He'd been calling and texting nonstop, but I'd ignored him. I didn't want to talk to him. I didn't want to hear his excuses, his apologies, his promises to fix things. I just wanted space. He knocked on the door at 7 p.m., holding a bouquet of my favorite flowers, white roses. I opened the door, and he smiled, like nothing had happened. Hey, baby. Can I come in? I stepped aside, letting him in. The apartment was small, cluttered with my things, books, art supplies, photos of my parents and friends. It felt like home, something our house never had. He handed me the flowers. I'm sorry. For the dinner party, for not telling you about Jake, for everything. I know I messed up. Big time. I set the flowers on the counter, didn't say anything. He walked around the apartment, looking at my things. You've really made this place your own. It's nice. Still, I didn't say anything. He turned to me, his face serious. Lila, I think we need to take a break. I froze. I'd been thinking about leaving him for weeks, but hearing him say it felt like a punch to the gut. A break? He nodded. Yeah. I think we've both been stressed lately, and we need some space to figure things out. Maybe if we're not together all the time, we can remember why we got married in the first place. I looked at him. He was staring at his feet, his hands in his pockets. He looked sad, guilty, but also relieved. Like he'd been wanting to say this for a long time. Part of me wanted to cry. Part of me wanted to beg him to stay, to fix our marriage, to be the man I'd married. But the other part, the part that had been hurt, betrayed, silenced for 3 years, wanted to scream, good riddance. Instead, I just said, okay. He looked up, surprised. Okay? I nodded. Okay. A break sounds good. He blinked, like he hadn't expected that. You're not upset? You're not going to cry? I shook my head. No. I'm not upset. I think you're right. We need space. He smiled, a small, relieved smile. Good. I was worried you'd be mad. I just think this is the best way to fix things. I didn't tell him that there was nothing to fix. That our marriage had been broken for a long time, that the money was just the final straw. I didn't tell him that I'd already made up my mind to leave him. I just said, I'll pack my things tomorrow. No, he said. You can stay here. This is your apartment. I'll go back to the house. We can take as much time as we need. I nodded. Okay. He stood there for a minute, like he didn't know what to say. I'll call you. In a few days. To check in. Okay. He leaned in, like he wanted to kiss me, but I turned my head. He hesitated, then pulled back. I'm sorry, Lila. For everything. I know. He walked to the door, turned around, and looked at me one last time. Then he left. As soon as the door closed, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry. I was just free. I didn't wait until tomorrow to pack. I started that night. I grabbed my duffel bag, threw in my clothes, my laptop, my art supplies, the photos of my parents and friends. I didn't take anything that reminded me of Ethan, no jewelry, no clothes he'd bought me, no mementos from our wedding or our relationship. They felt like lies, like reminders of the life I'd been living, the person I'd been. I packed quickly, efficiently, like I'd been planning this for months. Maybe I had. When I was done, I checked the apartment one last time. Did I forget anything? My phone, my wallet, my keys. The folder of evidence, the bank statements, the emails, the handwritten note, was tucked safely in my bag. I didn't want to leave it behind. I might need it someday. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and walked to my car. It was dark out, but the stars were bright, and the air was crisp. I got in my car, turned on the engine, and drove away. I didn't look back. I drove for hours, not knowing where I was going. I just wanted to get as far away from Ethan, from his family, from the life I'd been living, as possible. I ended up at a small motel on the outskirts of town, checked into a room, and collapsed on the bed. For the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel like I was overreacting. I didn't feel like I was the one in the wrong. I just felt calm, peaceful. I took a shower, changed into clean clothes, and lay in bed. I didn't sleep right away. I just stared at the ceiling, thinking about the future. What would I do now? Where would I live? How would I tell my parents about the money, about the divorce? I didn't have answers. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't care. I was free to make my own choices, to live my own life, to be myself. That night, I fell asleep with a smile on my face. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged to myself. The first month after leaving Ethan was the hardest. I moved into a tiny studio apartment in a quiet neighborhood, small, but mine. No Ethan, no his family, no lies, no silence. Just me, my things, and a blank slate. But freedom is scary. For 3 years, I'd relied on Ethan for everything, for decisions, for comfort, for a sense of belonging. Now, I was on my own, and I had no idea what I was doing. I got a job as a freelance graphic designer, working from home. It was the same work I'd been doing before, but now it felt different. I was working for myself, not to please Ethan or his family. Every project I completed, every client I satisfied, every dollar I earned, it was all mine. No one was taking credit for my work. No one was telling me I should slow down or focus on my family. It felt empowering. But it was also exhausting. I worked 12-hour days, 7 days a week, just to make ends meet. The studio apartment was cheap, but rent, utilities, and groceries still added up. I ate a lot of ramen noodles and frozen pizza. I didn't have time to go out with friends. I didn't have time to date. I didn't have time for anything except work. But I didn't mind. The exhaustion was a good kind of exhaustion, the kind that comes from hard work, from building something for yourself. I was tired, but I was also happy. Happier than I'd been in years. I started to rediscover who I was. I'd forgotten how much I loved painting, so I bought a set of acrylic paints and started painting on the walls of my apartment. I'd forgotten how much I loved reading, so I joined a book club at the local library. I'd forgotten how much I loved hiking, so I started going for hikes every Sunday morning. I reconnected with my friends. They were shocked when I told them about the divorce, about the money, about everything that had happened. But they didn't judge me. They just hugged me and said, "We're here for you." We started going out for coffee, for dinner, for girls' nights. They listened to me vent, they celebrated my small wins, they reminded me that I wasn't alone. I also reconnected with my parents. I told them about the money, about Jake stealing it, about Ethan lying to me. I cried as I told them, expecting them to be angry, to blame me. But they didn't. My mom just hugged me and said, "We're just glad you're okay, honey. The money doesn't matter. You matter." My dad nodded and said, "We'll get the money back. Together. But first, we need to make sure you're happy." Their support meant everything to me. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged. Like I was loved for who I was, not for who I could be for someone else. But there were hard days. Days when I missed Ethan, not the man he was, but the man I'd thought he was. Days when I felt lonely, when I wondered if I'd made a mistake. Days when I looked at my empty apartment and thought, what have I done? On those days, I'd pull out the folder of evidence. I'd read the emails, the bank statements, the handwritten note. I'd remind myself of the betrayal, of the lies, of the years I'd spent being silenced. It would hurt, but it would also remind me why I'd left. Why I couldn't go back. I also started seeing a therapist. I'd never been to therapy before, but I knew I needed help. I needed to process the betrayal, the grief, the anger. I needed to learn how to trust again, how to love again, how to be alone without being lonely. My therapist, Dr. Carter, was kind and patient. She listened to me, she validated my feelings, she helped me see that I wasn't the one in the wrong. She helped me understand that my worth wasn't tied to my marriage, that I was enough on my own. "Lila," she said to me one day, "you've spent your whole life trying to please other people. Trying to fit in, trying to be quiet, trying to be what everyone else wants you to be. But now, it's time to please yourself. It's time to be loud, to be unapologetic, to be you." Her words stuck with me. For the first time in my life, I started to believe her. I started to believe that I was enough. That I didn't need anyone else to make me happy. Slowly, things got easier. I started making more money from my freelance work. I started dating again, nothing serious, just casual dates with nice guys who treated me with respect. I started to feel like myself again. One night, I was sitting on my couch, drinking wine, watching a movie, and I realized something. I was happy. Truly happy. Not because I was in a relationship, not because I had a big house or a lot of money, but because I was living my life on my own terms. Because I was free. That's when I knew I'd made the right choice. Leaving Ethan was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was also the best. I'd lost a marriage, but I'd found myself. 6 months after leaving Ethan, I was cleaning out my closet when I found the folder. I'd forgotten I'd packed it, tucked away in the back of my duffel bag, under a pile of sweaters. I pulled it out, dusted it off, and sat down on the floor of my apartment, opening it for the first time since that night I'd left. Inside were the bank statements, the emails, the handwritten note from Ethan. But there was something else too, something I'd missed the first time. A stack of text messages between Ethan and his mom, dated months before Jake had even asked for the first loan. I started reading them, my heart racing. "Mom, Jake's business is failing. He needs money, or he'll lose everything. Ethan, I don't have any money to give him. We're saving for the house. Mom, what about Lila's parents' savings? They lent you the money for the down payment, right, Ethan? Mom, we promised Lila we'd never touch that money. It's their life savings. Mom, family comes first, Ethan. Jake is your brother. You have to help him. Ethan, but Lila will be upset. She'll find out. Mom, not if you don't tell her. Just take a little at a time. She'll never notice. Ethan, what if she does? Mom, then you tell her Jake needed help. Tell her it's a loan. She's too nice to say no. She'll forgive you. Ethan, okay. I'll do it. But if she finds out, it's your fault. Mom, she won't find out. And even if she does, family is family. She'll get over it. I sat there, staring at the text messages, and felt something inside me snap. Not in anger, not in grief, but in clarity. Ethan hadn't just made a mistake. He hadn't just helped his brother out. He'd planned this. He conspired with his mom to steal my parents' savings, to lie to me, to keep me in the dark. He'd never intended to tell me. He'd never intended to pay the money back. He'd just thought I was too nice, too quiet, too compliant to do anything about it. For 3 years, I'd blamed myself. I'd thought I was overreacting, that I was being unreasonable, that I'd failed as a wife. But now I knew the truth, none of this was my fault. I'd been lied to, betrayed, manipulated. I'd been a victim of their greed, their entitlement, their complete disregard for my feelings and my family. The realization didn't make me angry. It made me free. I closed the folder, stood up, and walked to the window. The sun was shining, and the birds were singing. I looked out at the street, at the people walking by, at the world going on around me, and I smiled. For the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel ashamed. I didn't feel like I was the one in the wrong. I called Dr. Carter that afternoon. I told her about the text messages, about the realization that none of this was my fault. She listened, and then she said, Lila, this is a huge step. You've been carrying this guilt around for years, and now you're finally letting it go. That's freedom. She was right. I was free. Free from the lies, free from the guilt, free from the silence. Free to be myself. That night, I went out to dinner with my friends. We laughed, we talked, we celebrated. I told them about the text messages, about the realization that none of this was my fault. They cheered, they hugged me, they told me I was brave. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Like I could finally move on. I didn't contact Ethan. I didn't need to. I didn't need to yell at him, or confront him, or make him apologize. I just needed to let him go. Let go of the anger, let go of the grief, let go of the life I'd thought I wanted. I started focusing on my future. I expanded my freelance business, hiring a few other designers to work with me. I moved into a bigger apartment, still small, but with a balcony and a view of the park. I started dating someone new, a nice guy named Ben, who was kind, respectful, and who loved me for who I was. But most importantly, I started loving myself. I started standing up for myself, saying no when I didn't want to do something, speaking my mind when I had something to say. I started living my life on my own terms. That's the truth that set me free. I didn't leave Ethan too early. I stayed too long. I stayed in a marriage that didn't value me, that didn't respect me, that didn't love me. But now, I was free. Free to find someone who would. Free to build a life that belonged to me. 8 months after leaving Ethan, I decided to get the money back. Not for me, for my parents. They deserved to have their life savings returned. They deserved to be treated with respect. And Jake and Ethan deserved to be held accountable for their actions. I didn't want to confront them with emotion. I didn't want to yell, or cry, or beg. I wanted to be calm, cool, and collected. I wanted to come with facts, with evidence, with deadlines. I wanted to show them that I wasn't the quiet, compliant wife they'd taken advantage of anymore. I was strong. I was independent. I was not to be messed with. I spent weeks preparing. I gathered all the evidence, the bank statements, the emails, the text messages, the handwritten note, and organized it into a folder. I printed out copies of everything, so they couldn't deny it. I consulted a lawyer, who told me that I had a strong case, that Jake was legally obligated to pay the money back. The lawyer also told me that Ethan was complicit in the theft, that he could be held legally responsible too. But I didn't want to sue Ethan. I just wanted the money back. I wanted closure. I called Ethan one afternoon. It was the first time I'd spoken to him since I'd left. His voice was surprised when he answered. "Lila? Is that you?" "It's me," I said. "I need to talk to you. About the money. My parents' money." There was a pause. "Lila, I'm sorry. I've been meaning to call you. Jake's been having trouble, but he's going to pay it back. I promise." "I don't want promises," I said. "I want action. I have all the evidence, bank statements, emails, text messages between you and your mom. I know you planned this. I know you never intended to tell me." Another pause. Longer this time. "How did you get the text messages?" "That doesn't matter," I said. "What matters is that the money is returned. All of it. $87,000. My parents worked hard for that money, and they deserve to have it back." "Lila, I can't just make Jake pay it back overnight," he said. "He's still struggling." "I don't care," I said. "I'm giving you 2 weeks. If the money isn't back in my parents' account by then, I'm filing a lawsuit. I've already consulted a lawyer, and she says I have a strong case. Not just against Jake, but against you too." "Lila, please," he said. "Don't do this. We're family." "Family doesn't steal from each other," I said. "Family doesn't lie to each other. You made your choice when you decided to steal my parents' savings. Now you have to face the consequences." I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. Not from fear, but from adrenaline. I'd never spoken to Ethan like that before. I'd never stood up for myself like that before. It felt empowering. 3 days later, Ethan called me back. "Can we meet?" he said. "I want to talk to you in person. About the money." I agreed. We met at a coffee shop downtown, a neutral location. I arrived early, ordered a latte, and waited for him. When he walked in, he looked different, tired, worn, like he'd been carrying a lot of guilt. He sat down across from me. "I'm sorry, Lila. For everything. For stealing the money, for lying to you, for betraying your trust. I know I can't take it back, but I'm sorry." "I know you are," I said. "But sorry doesn't pay back the money. My parents deserve to have their savings returned." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm here. I talked to Jake. He's not happy about it, but he agrees to pay the money back. All of it. He's going to transfer the first half next week, and the second half the week after. I'll make sure of it." I nodded. "Good. I want it in writing. A signed agreement that he'll pay the money back by the deadline. No exceptions." "I'll get it to you tomorrow," he said. We sat there in silence for a minute. Then he said, "How are you?" "Really?" "I'm good," I said. "Better than good. I'm happy." He smiled, a small, sad smile. "I'm glad. You deserve to be happy." "I know," I said. He stood up. "I'll get the agreement to you tomorrow. And Lila? I'm really sorry. For everything." "I know," I said. "Goodbye, Ethan." "Goodbye, Lila." He walked away, and I sat there, staring at my latte. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I just felt calm. Closure. The next day, Ethan dropped off the signed agreement. 2 weeks later, my parents called me, crying. "The money's back," my mom said. "All of it, $87,000. It's in our account." I smiled. "I told you it would be. We're so proud of you," my dad said. "You stood up for yourself. You stood up for us. We love you." "I love you too," I said. That night, I went out to dinner with my parents. We celebrated, we laughed, we cried. It was a perfect night. I never heard from Ethan again. I never heard from Jake, or Mom, or Mia. And I didn't care. I'd gotten what I wanted, the money back, closure, freedom. After getting the money back from my parents, my life started to fall into place. My freelance design business was booming. I'd hired 3 other designers, and we were working with clients all over the country. I'd moved into a beautiful apartment with a balcony that overlooked the park, and I'd decorated it exactly how I wanted: bright colors, cozy furniture, lots of plants and art. I was dating Ben, who was kind, funny, and supportive, and who loved me for who I was. But the best part was that I was finally living my life on my own terms. I wasn't trying to please anyone else. I wasn't swallowing my feelings. I wasn't being quiet to keep the peace. I was being myself, loud, unapologetic, happy. One day, I got an email from a design magazine. They were hosting a national design competition, and they wanted me to enter. The prize was $10,000, a feature in the magazine, and a chance to work with a big-name client. At first, I hesitated. I'd never entered a competition before. I was scared of failing, scared of being judged. But then I thought about everything I'd been through, the betrayal, the divorce, the struggle to stand on my own 2 feet. I thought about how far I'd come. I thought about Dr. Carter's words, "It's time to please yourself. It's time to be loud, to be unapologetic, to be you." So I entered. I spent weeks working on my entry, a branding project for a small nonprofit that helped homeless kids. I poured my heart and soul into it, using all the skills I'd learned over the years, all the emotions I'd felt. I didn't care if I won or lost. I just wanted to do something for myself. A month later, I got a call from the magazine. I'd won. I couldn't believe it. I screamed, I cried, I called my parents, my friends, Ben. They were all thrilled for me. The magazine feature came out a few months later, and it was amazing, full of photos of my work, quotes from me, and a story about my journey. After winning the competition, things really took off. I got more clients than I could handle. I was offered a promotion at a big design firm, but I turned it down. I didn't want to work for someone else. I wanted to run my own business, to be my own boss. Then, I got an offer to study abroad. A prestigious design school in Paris was offering a 3-month program for emerging designers. It was a dream come true. I'd always wanted to visit Paris, to study design in one of the most creative cities in the world. At first, I wanted to say yes. I wanted to pack my bags, move to Paris, and immerse myself in the culture. But then I thought about my life, my business, my friends, my family, Ben. I thought about how happy I was, how settled I was. I thought about how, for years, I'd been running from my marriage, running from my feelings, running from myself. But now, I didn't want to run anymore. I wanted to stay. So I said no. It was a hard decision, but it was the right one. I didn't need to go to Paris to prove anything to myself. I didn't need to run away to find happiness. I was already happy. I was already home. Ben was proud of me. "That takes a lot of courage," he said. "To say no to something you've always wanted because you're happy with what you have." "I know," I said. "But I'm not just saying no to Paris. I'm saying yes to my life. To us." He kissed me. "I love you. I love you too." That year, my business continued to grow. I hired more designers, moved into a bigger office, and started working with some of the biggest clients in the country. But I never forgot where I came from. I never forgot the years I'd spent being silenced, being betrayed, being alone. I started volunteering at the nonprofit I designed the branding for. I worked with homeless kids, teaching them art and design, helping them express themselves. It was rewarding, and it reminded me of how lucky I was. It reminded me that no matter how hard things get, there's always a way to turn your pain into something good. I also started speaking at design conferences. I talked about my journey, the betrayal, the divorce, the struggle to build my business. I talked about the importance of standing up for yourself, of being true to who you are, of never letting anyone make you feel small. After one of my speeches, a young woman came up to me. She was crying. "Your story changed my life," she said. "I'm in an unhappy marriage, and I've been too scared to leave. But after hearing you speak, I know I can do it. I know I deserve better." That's when I knew I'd built something bigger than a business. I'd built a life that mattered. A life that inspired others. A life that was truly mine. 2 years after leaving Ethan, I found myself sitting on the balcony of my apartment, watching the sunset over the park. Ben was sitting next to me, his arm around my shoulders, and we were drinking wine. It was a perfect night, warm, quiet, peaceful. "I can't believe how far you've come," Ben said, squeezing my shoulder. I smiled. "Me neither." 2 years ago, I'd been broken, betrayed, alone. I'd been living in a loveless marriage, surrounded by lies and silence. I'd been scared to stand up for myself, scared to be alone, scared to be who I really was. But now, I was happy. truly happy. I had a successful business that I loved. I had friends and family who loved me. I had Ben, who loved me for who I was, flaws and all. I had a life that was truly mine. Ben hadn't tried to save me. He hadn't tried to fix me. He'd just stayed. He'd been there for me during the hard days, celebrated with me during the good days, and loved me through it all. He'd never asked me to be someone I wasn't. He'd just loved me, the real me. That's what love is, I realized. It's not about saving someone. It's not about fixing them. It's about being there. It's about accepting someone for who they are, flaws and all. It's about supporting them, encouraging them, and loving them unconditionally. I thought about Ethan sometimes. Not with anger, not with grief, but with acceptance. I didn't hate him. I didn't wish him ill. I just felt sorry for him. Sorry that he'd never learned to be honest, sorry that he'd chosen his family's approval over his own happiness, sorry that he'd never known what it means to truly love and be loved. But I didn't think about him often. My life was too full, too happy, to dwell on the past. I didn't rebuild my life to prove anything to Ethan, or to his family, or to anyone else. I rebuilt it for myself. I rebuilt it because I finally knew what I would never accept again: lies, betrayal, silence, being made to feel small. I rebuilt it because I finally knew my worth.